And now on the line is Jane-Ann McKenna. Jane-Ann is the CEO of Dóchas. Jane-Ann, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, thank you very much, Darren. Lovely to speak with you.
Okay, Jane-Ann, I did loads of interviews for several years with your organisation when Hans Zomer and Fiona Coyle worked with you, and I did a couple of interviews with Suzanne Keating and Naomi Linehan as well when they worked with us. Today is only my second time to do an interview with you, Jane-Ann, and our last interview was just over a year ago. As it has been over a year since our last interview, Jane-Ann, could you remind our listeners, first of all, for those who don't know, about who Dóchas are, and could you tell me how you were getting on working with the organisation since you started working for them?
Oh, yes, of course. Thanks very much, Darren. So, Dóchas is the Irish network for all international development and humanitarian organisations. So many of your listeners probably will be familiar with the likes of, Goal, Trócaire, Concern, or indeed some other organisations like World Vision, Plan International, or even some smaller ones like Operation Smile, AidLink. So all of these are organisations, NGOs that are based here in Ireland. And as Dóchas, our role is to kind of bring them together, not only for kind of shared learning, for them to share some of their expertise, knowledge, but also to work together on common initiatives. So there's actually quite a lot of collaboration amongst the Irish NGOs. And we also work very much in advocating the Irish government on their policies on how the ODA budget is spent. That's our overseas aid budget. And also, what we think the priorities should be. And indeed, sharing our reflections and the reflections of the organisations of what the current situation is on the ground. So very much many of the organisations are working on the ground in Ukraine, in Turkey, Syria, in Sudan. And so they provide a valuable kind of expertise to the Irish government and, on the reality of the situation on the ground and, what it is that needs to be done as well. And just to let you know, I suppose I came into Dóchas as CEO about a year and a half ago, and I've spent about 14 years, I think, in the humanitarian sector. So I have worked for a number of years with Médecins Sans Frontières, and I believe I spoke to you then as well, Darren, and both as a director here in Ireland, but overseas. So I've worked for many years in places like Sudan and Central African Republic, in Afghanistan, and Iraq and a number of other places as well. So I've had my feet on the ground, I suppose, in many of the contexts and countries where our members work. And I think it's a real privilege to be able to come into this role now in Dóchas and see how we can create greater impact by seeing how we can improve the collaboration between all of the organisations who are very united in looking for a just, equal and sustainable world. And that's the united kind of mission of all of the organisations that are part of our membership.
Okay, this interview we are recording today may not be broadcast on Near FM until the following week, but I understand that on Tuesday, the 13th of June, yourselves and Dóchas launch your Budget 2024 submission. Can you tell me, Jane-Ann, how the day went, and tell me a bit about what you're calling for?
Sure. So I suppose in the lead up to kind of Budget 2024, we have released our own kind of pre-budget submission, and this represents the kind of the views and the asks really of all of our memberships. That's 58 international humanitarian and development organisations, and it really is a call to action to the Irish government, on how we need to accelerate progress on reaching the furthest behind. And, what we've really focused on, I think, in the launch of the submission on Tuesday was on the key themes of conflict, climate and hunger. So, these are very interlinked, all of these key areas, but it's very universal to what we're seeing in many of the places where our members are working. So, if you were to take, for example, the situation in Sudan today, where there has been an escalation of conflict and violence just in the last 2 months. And what we're seeing is that there are people who are on the move. There's over 1 million, I think, internally displaced. There's about 25 million people who are now in need of assistance just in Sudan alone. So you're seeing a culmination of a number of factors. Yes, there is conflict that is there, but because of the impacts of climate change, people who could, I suppose, lean on existing food systems that were previously there are becoming more and more unreliable. We're seeing the effects of drought in the region as well, and that is causing as well migration flows in the broader region surrounding Sudan. So, we have brought together some of the key examples of where our members are seeing the impact of climate, hunger and conflict, and how that is really affecting people on the ground, how that's really affecting people that our members are working with, the local communities who are there kind of bearing the brunt of many of these issues. And I think it was really to try to bring to bear kind of what it means and the consequences of not providing enough funding, enough support, enough leadership in trying to address some of these issues. And that was really our call to the Irish government. We recognise that, the Irish government has played a leadership role in the past. We have seen it with the UN Security Council, for example, and we see it in terms of their commitment towards addressing hunger, towards different initiatives. But we saw them step up last year with the Horn of Africa crisis and commit to more funding. And I think it is a case now that actually we do need, it's vital that the Irish government don't step back, don't take its foot off the pedal, essentially. We need that momentum to continue, because unfortunately, for many of the people who are in either fragile or conflict affected states, their situation is only deteriorating. It's only going one way, and we need to be able to provide support, not only for humanitarian support, but also to address some of those root causes of what is driving people into poverty, what is causing this level of inequality, and how we can support them in the best way possible to be resilient and to be able to be resourceful themselves.
Mm. I understand that last year, when it was Pascal Donoghue, I believe, he was the Minister for Finance last year, I understand that he dramatically increased the funding for Overseas Development Aid, or ODA, last year. Can you tell me more about this great news from last year, Jane-Ann?
Yeah, so last year we met with a number of, I suppose, government officials, including Pascal Donoghue, Minister Coveney, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, and indeed Minister Brophy, who was the Minister for Overseas Aid. And I think, to be honest, they really were very engaged with the issues. I think it was clear last year we were looking at a fourth a dry season, so a fourth season of no rains, effectively in the kind of East Africa region, which was having a significant impact on the people in the region in terms of a severe drought, increasing levels of hunger, and the risk of widespread famine. And we did see that the Irish government did step up. They committed an additional 177 million to overseas assistance last year. And I think I suppose it's good to mention that, we were able to, commit that spending last year and support, trying to address some of these issues. But this is part of a broader commitment that the Irish government have made. So they have committed to spending 0.7% of GNI on overseas aid by 2030. And I think we are calling on the government to, adhere to that commitment as our economy is getting stronger and stronger year on year, that we are looking to see that to go up proportionately, that amount that is being spent on ODA, as per that we have committed on an international agreement to do so by 2030. And at the moment, we're about 0.4%. So we have kind of estimated what is needed to kind of keep us on track to progress to 0.7 by 2030.
Okay, I saw a tweet by a man called David McNair on Tuesday about this, but anyway, he was saying that while we had a big increase in ODA funding in last year's budget for the current year, there has been a catch involved with the situation. Can you tell me, our listeners, Jane-Ann, more about what this kind of catch is?
Yeah, so I suppose technically speaking, in terms of how Ireland records its ODA, there's a OECD DAC mechanism that I suppose tracks how each country is doing. And actually, technically, as part of that mechanism, you can count in-country refugee costs as ODA in the first year. So, typically you would see kind of the first year of spending on asylum seekers coming to Ireland, direct provision system, etc., in those being counted as ODA. But I suppose, obviously, as you know, for 2022, we had a significant increase in our Ukraine response. So a significant amount of money was attributed to the Ukraine response in terms of supporting Ukrainians who came to Ireland. And actually, so what has happened is that I suppose that has kind of inflated our ODA somewhat, because the money that was spent on Ukraine refugees here in Ireland was counted as ODA, and that brought it up to 0.64. And I think it is recognised both by the Department of Foreign Affairs, by the ministers, that perhaps is not necessarily an accurate portrayal of our ODA, because it's somewhat inflated due to, I suppose, the spike in costs for Ukrainian refugees last year. But I think, we are saying that, we would welcome Ireland continuing to support Ukrainian refugees here in Ireland. We think it's really important, but we think it's important to do both. We think it's important that Ireland continues its response here in Ireland to Ukrainians, but also does not let that impede what it is contributing and supporting to conflict-affected, fragile and climate crisis-affected countries as well.
And for next year, the money spent on refugees is not going to be included in our ODA. So, if the government were to maintain or increase the point to the 6.4%, we'd be doing very well, would we?
We would, that would require nearly doubling what we're spending overseas if they were to, let's say, if they were to hold up to the 0.64%, and have that as money being spent overseas on ODA, that would nearly double the budget that we have at the moment. So we think that might be a bit of a stretch, but we would like to see Ireland continuing to stay on track to achieve 0.7 on funding that is spent, in fragile affected, conflict affected states, and trying to reach the furthest behind in those countries.
Okay, Jane-Ann, to come towards the end of our interview, you've already answered this question, but can you give me a summary of what your message is, a summary to Michael McGrath and the government, and indeed politicians in general, with the budget coming up in a few months?
Yes, indeed. So there's a couple of asks and recommendations that we do have for the Irish government. So obviously, as I mentioned there, the commitment to stay on track to 0.7 being spent overseas on the ODA, but also a scale up of Ireland's humanitarian funding to conflict affected and fragile states. We also would like to see Ireland continue and demonstrate its leadership in global initiatives, particularly relating to hunger and sustainable food systems. We would also like Ireland to act on climate change, both on its own commitments around climate finance, but indeed in terms of our own obligations in terms of reducing emissions here in Ireland. And I think also we are very, this year presents an opportunity. Ireland is co-facilitating the SDG Summit, that's the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in New York in September. And I think as part of our commitment to implementing the SDGs, both here at home and overseas, we would like to see them, very much hardwired into our planning budgetary processes here across the state, so that it shows a very political signal that we are putting the furthest behind first in our domestic and international policies and ensuring that we're not leaving anybody behind.